Hi guys, Brain here and welcome to another video. I know I said I was going to get the studio back up before I started recording again, but Behavior went ahead and released a very wonderful and very great developer update, so I might as well get into the changes because coming on the 12th with the All Things Wicked chapter, that being Sable in the Unknown, there's a lot of great stuff coming that you may have been worried about in the PTB that has actually been fixed. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about it. First off, the Unknown is getting a little bit of a minor buff. I know a lot of people talked about thinking the Unknown was a little bit underwhelming, but I thought that it was one of those singularity situations where in the PTB, people aren't going to realize his maximum potential, but somebody who mains the character, who goes really hard at learning his skill curve, could probably get a lot out of this character and potentially make them a high A, mid A, or even high B tier character. But it seems that Behavior's erred on the side of caution, with people kind of claiming that the character seems weaker than they should be, and they've given them a little bit of buffs. First off, the weakness duration now increases by 6 seconds when the survivor's injured by the UVX, which is the little ball thing, and also hindered on the airborne effect is now doubled from 3% to 6%, which is going to help this character a significant amount. I think there's a lot of things about the Unknown that I already think are particularly strong, like their teleport to their husks, being able to wall bang with their power, being able to ricochet shots. So now this character is going to be even stronger with these changes. I don't know if they necessarily needed them. Like I said, I think it's a Larry situation where people just kind of weren't seeing the full potential of the character, or that the character's full potential was not immediately available, meaning that it has a higher skill floor. But we'll take these. Hopefully they're not too much, but we'll have to see how they play out on live. There was also another change that, like, the blindness duration for the Homie and Ask add-on was increased, but like blindness is not a particularly impressive status effect as it is, so this probably isn't going to affect much. For you wonderful pig mains out there was a wonderful change happening, because when the pig changes came through, if you don't know what they're doing to pig, they're making their dash significantly better in a lot of ways, which is wonderful because that's the side of the pig's kit which was kind of weaker. That's where mostly in a good spot, and the dash is the kind of the part of the pig's power that was very weak and underwhelming and left a lot to be desired, so they buffed that. But however, Behavior was kind of scared that if they buffed the dash, that the character's, kill rate would go through the roof and the character would be a little bit too oppressive, so they ended up nerfing the reverse bear trap time in the PTB. It ended up that the dash changes that they made to the pig actually were just very helpful and more of a quality of life change than more of a something that was a very strong and oppressive buff. So they went back and reverted the bear trap time back to 150 seconds when they pushed it up to 180. This is awesome. This is exactly what I requested, because I understand kind of wanting to be cautious when it comes to buffing and anti-chase ability of all things, but they didn't need the nerf along with the pig trap timer, because the dash changes were more just nice and not actually something that were way too oppressive. So good job. The Huntress Hatchet update is probably the biggest one and the biggest infamous change that has come through this PTB. Huntress got a lot of like really impressive buffs, which was interesting because Huntress is already one of the top, or has been historically always been one of the most played characters in the game. Even in the recent stats of most played characters, she was still third. So showing that Huntress has stood the test of time as a very enjoyable and well-picked character in the Dead by Daylight roster. So it was kind of interesting to have a character that was already considered A tier, very strong by the community, and also very highly played by the community, getting a bunch of buffs, which just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, they took away their most problematic buff that came through the PTB, which was their movement speed while holding a hatchet, which was buffed a whopping 0.5, which I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but in DBD terms, movement speed, we always talk about how haste is kind of a scary status effect, so giving somebody a whole 0.5 in terms of movement speed while having a hatchet up is very significant. You've probably seen the infamous Twitter clip of that person chasing somebody around Shack with their hatchet up and mostly keeping up, which for a ranged killer is terrifying. Very terrifying. So they went ahead and moved this back to the 3.08, which is very thankful, very great. You're still gonna have that situation where Huntresses can run up to 10 hatchets and retain the other buffs, which is kind of spooky. But hopefully it's not too much. I do think that out of the changes that they went to revert, I think this is the one that needed it the most, so I'm happy for that. And at least like having more hatchets will help players that are trying to learn the character have more hatchets to throw. But overall, it's a buff to every Huntress, because one of the big things that makes Huntress lose their ability to pressure gens as much as they have so much downtime because they have to go reload a lot. Their power isn't always instantly available to them. So anytime you have to spend stopping, walking to a locker, opening a locker, and then finishing the animation, that's time spent not pressuring a gen. Now, pervasively across every Huntress player, you now have to spend less time off of pressuring the map. So that is an objective buff to every Huntress player. So he is still buffed either way. The clown quality of life changes were unexpected. The big one that we were very happy for is the accessibility problem with his gasping way too obscuring, making people nauseous and motion sick and that sort of thing. That's coming through, which is great. But the one thing that people were worried about with this was Pinky Finger, because unlike Eerie Head on Huntress, picking the Pinky Finger add-on, the exposed add-on, does not actually limit the amount of bottles you have like it does with Huntress's Eerie Head. So with Clown having more base bottles, that meant you just had more Pinky Fingers to throw, which was very obnoxious. And honestly, the change that they ended up going with, thankfully, was that they matched it with the Huntress's Eerie Head and made Pinky Finger limit your bottles to 1. This should have happened the moment that they changed this add-on. they should have matched it with Eerie Head the first time they went through and patched these add-ons. Like, there was no reason they shouldn't have, and they just kind of like, I don't know why, maybe they just didn't think it was as good as Huntress's, because, you know, Huntress can throw a hatchet anywhere, where Clown has a limit to how far you can throw. Maybe that was the rationale, but I don't know. Realistically, they should have just kept them in line with each other and limited it the first time. So I'm glad that they corrected that old mistake and finally made it limit to 1. The Invocation perk from Sable is getting a very substantial buff. A lot of people were very worried about this being really OP and kind of ruining the balance of Dead by Daylight when it first came out. But in practice, when we actually played in the PTB, it was very pointless, especially with the amount of time you have to spend to even get the Invocation to go off, or to have a bunch of gens just suddenly get progress, but the killers can just kick them and go immediately undo that. Like, it was essentially just like not worth it at all. Now it has had a very significant buff. Now the Invocation essentially applies a BNP to every gen when this happens. I already think that the brand new parts add-on is extremely ridiculous and probably shouldn't be in the game and should just be completely reworked into something else. So having something else in the game that also applies a BNP is something. At least this one takes an egregious amount of time just sitting in the basement doing nothing to have go off, unlike BNPs, which require just a hard skill check, which is not a hard skill check if you play the game for more than like 10 minutes. So at least there's that. And if anything, maybe I'm talking myself into a corner here and realizing something. It's like, maybe this should be the only way this should be applied. Maybe the way BNPs are bad is because of the ease of access to this very strong effect and not necessarily the effect itself. If you spend a bajillion hours in the basement trying to be like, just to get gens to be a little bit easier to be done, maybe that is the worthwhile payoff and not a hard skill check. Maybe that's the way that we will preserve the BNP effect, and then hopefully we can finally look at BNPs and be like, can we just retire this already? This has just never been in the history of the add-on ever a fair add-on, so let's just like do away with it and just leave it in the Invocation perk. Yeah, this is one we're gonna have to keep an eye on to make sure it's not too much, but very interesting change nonetheless. Strength in Shadows was kind of like the only like quote-unquote good perk that actually came out of Sable's teachables. This is the one where you can self-care yourself in the basement, but you do it at a increased speed than you would with self-care. They buffed this by 10%, making it a little bit better, but this was already a pretty good perk. I think this thing, and spoilers for what's coming with the next perk, is that a lot of the time basement either spawns in shack or in the main building, and a lot of the time you're going to be looping main building or shack as survivor, because those are usually the strongest places to loop, because those are just extremely strong structures. So the idea that like, oh well, it's hard to get to the basement or it's dangerous to go to the basement, often you're kind of already there in a lot of circumstances, like looping. And even if you get caught trying to go into the basement, you're usually around a very strong tile, depending on the main building, and obviously shack is always good. So I don't know. I think this perk is really good, really solid. Probably not problematic, but like it is really good, and especially since now it's got that 10% bonus. I expect to see a lot of people using this, especially in their like niche healing builds. I think it's one of those perks that's going to be like good, but not a lot of people bring it because they just assume it's bad. Something kind of like Inner Strength. Like Inner Strength's really good, but a lot of people don't bring it because they're like, oh well, it's not just prove thyself and I just hop on a gen and I just get extra gen progress, or hey, it's life, so I hop a window and I win a chase for free. You know, like it's not extremely strong. It's not like a top 10 perk, but it's really solid. And so smart people that actually play the game and don't rely on autopilot perks will realize this is pretty good and probably run it. All right, let's talk about the most controversial perk, this one being Wicked. Wicked had a very dumb effect in terms of countering Mangled, which Mangled is still getting nerfed this update. So like having a perk come out with Sable that counters Mangled when Mangled itself was being nerfed made no sense. So they completely reworked Wicked to now be a free deliverance. And I will say that with a capital F, free deliverance out of the basement. And you also see the killer's aura for 20 seconds after you are unhooked. This is going to be a problematic perk. I don't know if it's going to be OP, but it's definitely going to be problematic because like I mentioned in the previous perk, basement always spawns in either the main building or shack. These are almost always extremely good loops to loop in Dead by Daylight. Shack is obviously the strongest general tile that spawns in Dead by Daylight, and most main buildings are extremely strong for Survivor and have a lot of resources for survivors to use to evade the killer. So this kind of like the idea in behavior's eyes is that the balance factor for Wicked is that, well, you have to go down in the basement or around the basement, which is obviously a bad thing if you get hooked in basement because that's a benefit for the killer. However, you have a lot of resources to your advantage if you're around basement, because basement always spawns in extremely strong survivor structures, whether that be shack or a main building. So it's not as bad as you think. And what I see coming is that a lot of survivors are going to intentionally go down near or around basement just so they can go down and get their free deliverance. Deliverance is already an extremely strong, like top 5 survivor perk in the game, but at least deliverance has a prerequisite, which is to, you know, save somebody first before you unhook yourself. This one is just go down near basement, which is not that hard of a prerequisite to fulfill. You're gonna see a lot of killers just kind of like not hooking a basement, avoiding hooking in basement just to try and get rid of this perk, and that may not always be viable, especially against Sabo squads. If you have a Sabo squad and they all have Wicked, or a lot of them are running Wicked, you're going to want to avoid hooking in basement, which means you're going to carry the survivor farther to a hook, and if they're waiting there with like double oak and Sabo, it's going to be very, very miserable. This is going to create some very, very miserable matches. I see this not being a good effect for the health of the game. I hope I'm wrong, but like this seems like a cognizant player, someone who knows how to get the most out of this perk, will be able to get the most out of this perk without much resistance, and it's going to be very annoying. Oh yeah. Even before I get too far, they didn't walk back the Mangle change, which I find very, very interesting, because this was something that I saw was almost universally something that people weren't cool with. People really, really wanted the Mangle change reverted, and there wasn't actually particularly a lot of survivor mains, at least that I saw in the communities that I'm a part of, that were like, yeah, Mangle's finally going. Like most people were just kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird, or just completely indifferent to it. So it's like, I thought it was really interesting that they decided to double down on having the Mangle nerf go through. That is kind of weird, kind of odd, but I wish they would walk it back, but they ended up not. It's kind of like the only L from this so far, besides obviously the Wicked thing. And that is it. Those are the changes from the dev update. This chapter is coming out on the 12th, so there is still time for them to change things like the mangled thing if they do choose to do so, but I don't think they will. But there's some time for them to choose to, you know, continue to affect things, continue to change things before they release. But what do you guys think of the dev update? I think it was mostly a W. I think there was a lot of great changes that were very much, you know, keeping the pulse on the community and going, oh, hey, that's cool. The community didn't seem to like that, so we're just gonna, you know, go with what they suggested, which is not something that especially old behavior used to do. So I'm very happy to see that they were very receptive to our ideas. But other than that, that's it for today's video, friends. Thank you so much for watching. I do upload daily, so I will see you tomorrow. But if I do not, I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.